so as you open up to Joshua chapter 5, I want to share a story with you. My brother is my best friend, and even though we're best friends, we're brothers. So that meant as kids, we fought a lot, we wrestled a lot, we argued a lot, and would get on each other's nerves and push each other's buttons. And so one time our mom was taking us to SeaWorld. We grew up in San Antonio, and she was taking us to SeaWorld as a gift, which was a really big deal because we didn't have a lot of material possessions growing up. And so this was a really big deal to be able to afford to go to SeaWorld for the day. And my brother and I were getting on each other's nerves, and we were arguing and picking at each other and picking at each other like little kids and siblings will do. And of course, it was driving our mother absolutely insane. And so she does what every mother does, is she kept telling us to knock it off, to apologize, to get along, to make today a good family trip. All right? Make today enjoyable for mom, instead of driving her absolutely crazy with your shenanigans. And of course, we don't listen. We keep picking at each other. We keep fighting and going back and forth in the back of the car. And finally, our mom, because she's at her wits' end with our obnoxiousness, decides to tell us, if you two don't behave, I'm going to turn this car around, we're going to go home, and we're not going to SeaWorld. Now that's a big deal. You're going to take SeaWorld? You're not going to do this. And so, of course, instead of listening to this rule that mom has laid down, we keep fighting with each other. And we keep arguing. And then it turns into trying to get mom on our side. Right? Well, he started, or he's doing this, and he's poking me this way, and he's saying this, and he's doing this to me. And mom, why don't you see that I'm right and he's wrong? Have you ever been in those moments growing up or as a parent? Where it's like, why don't you see that I'm right? They're the one that started. They're the one doing it wrong. You should see that I'm right, and you should punish them, not me. And so because of our terrible behavior, our mom comes through on her threat, and she pulls over, turns the car around, and we go straight home and do not get to go to SeaWorld because we were both wrong. Even though we had been fighting and he had done some stuff to me and I had done some stuff to him, it didn't really matter. We were both in the wrong, and our mom could see that. She wasn't going to pick sides because mom was on mom's side. Because mom is always right. And it made me start thinking about, as we get older, sometimes we blame that on as kids. They're like, oh, we're just young, and oh, that's immature behavior by kids, but we still do the same thing, right? It doesn't really matter what age you get to. We all still love to be right. When we get into arguments and we get into debates and fights over anything in life, whether it's relationships, jobs, sports teams, politics, we love to be right. We love to prove the other person wrong. So my question for you is, how much energy do we spend and waste in our lives just trying to be right? Just trying to prove the other person is wrong. We all do this. We're all guilty of receiving this kind of behavior. We're all guilty of doing these kinds of things. And it's exhausting, isn't it? It's exhausting always having to be right. Always having to get that last word in. Right? You might have experienced it this way, where you see two people that you know, and they start arguing, and they're starting to fight over something. And it could be something little, it could be something serious. We've all been there. And you know what happens in those moments, right? One of them will come to you, or maybe both of them will come to you one-on-one and try to argue their case before you and say, don't you see that I'm right? Can't you see how wrong they are and what they're doing wrong? And can't you see which side is the right side? And then there kind of becomes this pressure for you to choose, right? And we all know that in those moments, there's a right choice and a wrong choice, at least in their opinion. Right? And if you make the wrong choice or you choose the wrong side, sadly what happens oftentimes is that relationship is broken. And it's damaged for a very long time, if not forever. You see, my brother and I were real little, and we were trying to convince our mom, you're gonna pick a side, Mom. You know, and as when we're little kids, it can be irritating and it can be annoying. But as we get older and as we mature and our relationships grow differently and we become adults, those same things can still happen. The problem is it doesn't just stay at, well, it's just a little annoying or it's just a little frustrating, or all you have to do is turn the car around and not go to SeaWorld. See, now the consequences become much more serious. There can be divorce, there can be broken relationships, there can be estranged family members, and all kinds of hurts can pile up in our lives because we spend so much energy as humans trying to be right, trying to convince everybody else that they should choose our side. Well, the sad thing is that we end up doing this same thing with God so often. And in fact, Joshua is not unlike us in this. And so in Joshua chapter 5, what we're going to read is as Joshua and the people of Israel are getting ready for the battle of Jericho, Joshua goes off on his own to the battlefield to oversee it and to look it over before the day that the battle begins, because he is the leader. And so it says this in Joshua chapter 5. When Joshua was near Jericho, he looked up and saw a man standing in front of him with a drawn sword in his hand. Joshua approached him and asked, "Are you for us or for our enemies?" In verse 13, when it says there was this man, biblical scholars have debated about this for a long time, because as we keep reading, we're to see he's not an ordinary man. It's an actual divine being. And so some people say it's an angel, and others say it is the pre-incarnate Jesus Christ before he was born and took on flesh and blood. And so either way, what we do know is that this is not an ordinary man. It looks like a man to Joshua, but the story is going to tell us later on that it is a divine being. And so Joshua sees him and he asks this question, "Are you for us or our enemies?" And so Joshua is like us, right? You approach your friend or your family member about that situation, about that conflict, about that argument and that conversation, and your question to them is usually, "Are you for us? Or are you for them?" And the question becomes, how is God, through this divine messenger, going to respond? Right? That's a big deal. Joshua is essentially asking God, are you on my team? Or are you on their team? And we're going to see the answer in verse 14. "Neither," he replied. And there's more to the verse, we'll get there. But I just love that matter-of-fact answer. Joshua walks up. He's the leader of the people of Israel. God has told him, be strong and courageous. Be bold as you go into the promised land. You're a warrior, Joshua, who's accomplished victory after victory. And I'm going to be with you on all these battles. And he walks up to this man who's holding a sword. And he goes, whose team are you on? Whose side are you on? Theirs or mine? And I love how this divine messenger, how God says, neither. I'm not for them, and I'm not for you. The verse goes on, I have now come as commander of the Lord's army. So now we know who this is. He's the commander of the Lord's army. So not Jericho's army, not Israel's army, but the Lord's army. So really what's happening here is God is teaching Joshua and us that he's not picking sides. That God's not on Jericho's side, he's not on Joshua's side. God is on God's side. He's the commander of the Lord's armies, not Jericho's, not Joshua's, not Israel's. And I think there's something very powerful and important for us to learn from that. That it's not about us trying to figure out whose team is God going to be on. Right? It's not about us going in an argument with one another and dividing ourselves and having all kinds of debate and conflict and then trying to figure out whose team God is on. Because what God's word teaches us is that God is for God. God's not going to pick sides, because the reality is, since they're a sinner and I'm a sinner and you're a sinner, at the end of the day, we're all wrong. We're all going to say the wrong things. We're all going to make mistakes and come up short. And so God is on God's side. And then Joshua has this wonderful response, which we'll get into later. He bows his face to the ground in worship and asked him, "What does my Lord want to say to his servant?" And so this question comes out of a heart of humility and repentance of Joshua, where he realizes, oh, it's not about what I have to say. It's not about me trying to convince the commander of the Lord's armies to try to convince God to be on my side. It's about me learning, what does the Lord have to say to me? Not so much about what do I have to say to God. And we see this everywhere in our world, though. It's not just Joshua walking up and asking the Lord, are you on our side or their side? Are you for us or for them? Whose team are you on? And this still happens to this day. We see this all around us, right? And you just replace commander of the Lord's armies with Jesus. Right? And we see this all over the place in the news and in articles and magazines and social media. Well, if Jesus was around, he would fill in the blank. You know, if Jesus was here today, he would vote this way. And other people come up, no, actually, if Jesus was around, he would vote that way. Right? If Jesus was around, he would join this political party. No. The other side says, if Jesus was around today, he would be in this political party. Right? We all see this everywhere. It goes back and forth. We argue back and forth. And have you ever noticed, though, how convenient it is that Jesus always ends up on their side? Right? Whoever's making the argument, well, Jesus was around today, he would vote like this, and it happens to be exactly how that person would vote. Well, if Jesus was around, he would do this, and it happens to be exactly the same thing that that person would do. And we can go on with that. Right? It's convenient how that always ends up happening, that Jesus always happens to be on their team. He always happens to be siding with me in these arguments. So the question becomes, what do we do? You know, Joshua teaches us that we need to enter with humility and repentance. What does the Lord have to say to me? Not what do I have to say to God to convince him that I'm right and everybody else is wrong and he needs to be on my team and he needs to be on my side and he needs to be against them. Right? Instead, we need to learn from Joshua, what does the Lord have to say to me? So a good place to start is with what Jesus actually said, right? Instead of playing this game of, well, Jesus would do this and Jesus would do that and he would say this and he would say that and he would vote this way, no, he would vote that way. And we just go back and forth arguing and causing more and more division and conflict and hurt in our world. Let's start with, what does Jesus say for himself? And so in Matthew chapter 8, Jesus is speaking to a crowd and he's speaking to his disciples and he says, Jesus told them, foxes have dens and birds of the sky have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. Culturally speaking, King Herod and his family ruled Israel at the time. They ruled that province of the Roman Empire called Israel, and Herod ruled Jerusalem. And the nickname that people had for Herod, because they didn't really like him, what they did is they feared him. But because they didn't really like him or respect him, the nickname they had for him behind his back was a fox. And even later on, Jesus will call Herod a fox directly. And so when Jesus is saying, well, foxes have dens, he's saying, yeah, Herod has his own kingdom. And you can see it. It's Jerusalem. It's Israel. And then the symbol for the Roman Empire at the time was an eagle, which is a bird. And so Jesus says the birds have nests. So he's saying, yeah, you can look at it. And you can see the Roman Empire has its kingdom in this world. And then Jesus says, the Son of Man, which is a title for himself, has no place to lay his head. So what's Jesus doing there? He's saying, my kingdom is not like Herod's, and it's not like Rome's. I'm not going to choose between the two. I have my own kingdom, and as he will say many times throughout the Gospels, my kingdom is not of this world. So when we go to Jesus, we try to figure out, well, whose side is he on, and whose side is he going to take in this argument, and in this debate, and in this conflict? What we see from Jesus himself is that he's saying, I'm not part of Herod's kingdom. I'm not part of Rome's kingdom. I have my own kingdom, and it's completely different than any other in this world. And so as we go on, the question becomes, how do we live this out? You know, we so often want to behave like Joshua, and the gut reaction is always to find people or to talk to God and say, are you on my side or on their side? Are you with me or are you with them? Well, we have to learn from Joshua's humility, Joshua's question of, what does the Lord have to say to me? I think there's two things for us to keep in mind and keep in our hearts as we go throughout life. And because the reality is, we're all going to experience conflict. We're all going to come into moments where we bump into another person and we upset them and they upset us, and we're going to argue and we're going to fight and we're going to debate. And sometimes it's going to be over real little things that we all know can get blown out of proportion. And other times it's going to be over serious things that do require serious conversations. But how do we do it peacefully and lovingly, rather than trying to cause more division and more hurt and more pain in the world by dividing people and saying, are you with them or with me? And if you're with them, well, we're not friends anymore. Right? And so I think there's two things we can learn from. One is Paul's words in Ephesians 6, which we'll read in a moment, and then Jesus' words from the cross. And so in Ephesians chapter 6, Paul says this, for our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers of this darkness, against evil spiritual forces in the heavens. And so Paul is reminding the church, he's reminding you and I, as followers of Jesus, that my battle is not against you. Right? My struggle, my battle is not against other human beings. What Paul is saying here is that our battle as followers of Jesus is actually against Satan and demons and all of the evil in the world. And we need to have this in our minds and in our hearts, because the reality is that we are all going to be tempted, that when our tempers start to flare up, when our blood starts to boil a little bit because they're just aggravating us and they're just annoying us and bothering us, and that we're picking fights over here and over there, that our gut reaction, our temptation is going to be to lash out, to get even, to prove them wrong, to make sure everybody knows that I'm right. But Paul's reminding us, you've got to put that aside. You can't think that way and you can't live that way as a follower of Jesus. You have to remember, I have to remember in my own life, that my battle, my struggle is not against other human beings. That people are not the problem. People are there for us to love and forgive and to connect with Jesus. And so Paul is reminding the church, remember, even though you might have an argument with them, you might have a debate with them or a conflict with them, that the greater reality is that they're not the enemy. They're not there for you to destroy and put down and tear apart. They are there for us to love and serve and connect to Jesus. And so we need to remember that our battle is not with them, right? Our battle is against Satan and all the evil in the world. And our job as followers of Jesus is to bring more forgiveness and love and light into all those dark places and to heal those wounds by God's grace. So the second thing for us to remember is in Luke chapter 23, where Jesus is on the cross. Father, forgive them, because they do not know what they are doing. See, Jesus gives us a different way of living. The way that we are all tempted to dive right into is the way of living where I'm always right and they're always wrong. Where I get the last word in, and that's final. I promise you can live like that. You can live where you're always winning the argument. You can live where you're always the person that has to be right. You can live a life where you're the one always getting the last word in. But I can also promise you this, if that's the way you're going to live, you're going to be very lonely. And eventually you're going to be exhausted. It's so tiring, always trying to be right and prove everybody else wrong. And there's the old saying that you can win the argument, and at the same time you can lose the person. Right? We can win the argument and then lose the relationship. See, Jesus on the cross gives us a whole other way to live, a whole different way of life. He could have very easily on the cross won the argument. He could have gotten off and proven them wrong. And instead, he says, forgive them. See, that's the life that Jesus invites you and I to live in and to show to the world. A life that's built on forgiveness and love, rather than being right and proving everybody else wrong. See, I think when Jesus says from the cross, forgive them, they don't know what they're doing. It's because it's kind of like my brother and I on the way to SeaWorld. We're fighting and fighting and fighting, but we don't really know what we're doing. We're trying to convince our mom that we're right and the other one is wrong. And we had to see things different. We had to learn that that's not always true. See, Jesus wants you and I to learn that there's a different way of living. That it's not about me being right and them being wrong. It's about me needing the cross and them needing the cross. It's about me needing those words from Jesus, Father, forgive him. He doesn't know what he's doing. And it's about them needing those same words. Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. And I can guarantee you that if we live a life like that, rooted in the cross and rooted in those words of forgiveness from Jesus, the world will change. Your relationships in your home and at your work and in your neighborhood will change. And people's hearts will change. Because we walk around in the world and everybody expects that, oh, I made a mistake, so here comes this person to prove me wrong and to remind me of how they're right and I'm wrong. And what if instead the gut reaction became, they're going to forgive me? And what if our gut reaction became, instead of, all right, time to win another argument, time to prove them wrong and make sure everybody knows that I'm right? What if our gut reaction became, time to forgive them? That's my hope and prayer for you today. That instead of running around in our human relationships and asking them, are you on my team or on theirs? Instead of running to God like Joshua did and going, are you on our side or on their side? That we would be people that live like Jesus, that we live lives rooted in the cross and his words of forgiveness. And so when we run around in our human relationships, we're running around to hand out forgiveness and grace and kindness. And that when we come to God because there's a conflict and an argument in our life, we don't go, hey, pick me, be on my team. That we'd say, forgive me. What do you have to say to me, Lord? And while you're at the job of forgiving me, Jesus, please forgive them.